One statement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu shocked the world. His words sparked debates about history, religion, and identity. Who are the real Israelites? Could history be different from what we've been told? The story of Black Biblical Israelites is deeper than you think. Many believe they are the true descendants of ancient Israel. But what does Netanyahu's statement really mean? To understand the full truth, stay with us until the end, because this goes deeper than you can imagine. History is more than just dates and events. It is the story of identity, belonging, and truth. But what if the truth about a people's history had been buried for centuries? What if an entire group had been erased from the records, their legacy rewritten by those in power? This is the mystery of the Black Biblical Israelites, a community whose past is deeply intertwined with the history of ancient Israel, Africa, and the transatlantic slave trade. Many claim they are the lost descendants of the biblical Israelites, the true children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But for centuries, their story has been ignored, dismissed, or deliberately erased. Could they be right? Could history be far different from what we were taught? To understand the weight of this question, we must go back, way back, to where it all began. The Black Biblical Israelites believe they are the original descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel, the chosen people of God. Their claim is not just a matter of faith. It is rooted in ancient texts, historical records, and a painful past that spans continents. For them, the Bible is more than a religious book. It is a historical document that holds the proof of their identity. They see themselves in the pages of Deuteronomy 28, where Moses warns the Israelites of blessings if they obey God and curses if they turn away. One curse in particular stands out. The Lord will bring you back in ships to Egypt on a journey I said you should never make again. There you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you. Deuteronomy 28:68. To many Black Israelites, this prophecy is chillingly similar to what happened during the transatlantic slave trade, where millions of Africans were stolen from their lands, shackled in chains, and sold into slavery. Was this just a coincidence? Or was this an ancient warning coming true? The history of Israel is one of struggle, exile, and survival. According to biblical history, the 12 tribes of Israel were scattered across different lands after the destruction of their kingdom. Some were taken to Babylon, others to Assyria, and some fled southward, into the heart of Africa. Many historians argue that Jewish communities thrived in Africa long before the rise of the transatlantic slave trade. Ancient maps and Arab records mention Israelite tribes in places like Ethiopia, Mali, Ghana, and Nigeria. Some scholars even believe that groups like the Igbo of Nigeria, the Lemba of southern Africa, and the Beta Israel of Ethiopia have deep historical ties to the Israelites. But why is this part of history rarely taught? Why is there so little discussion about the possibility that Israelites migrated to Africa and lived there for centuries? Some believe the answer is uncomfortable, because acknowledging this truth would mean rewriting history itself. The transatlantic slave trade was one of the darkest chapters in human history. Millions of African men, women, and children were kidnapped, chained, and sold into slavery. They were stripped of their names, their languages, and their past. But what if their past was not just African, but also Israelite? For the Black Biblical Israelites, this isn't a theory. It's a reality. They believe that many of the enslaved people taken from Africa were not just victims of colonial greed, but descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. They see the slave ships as a fulfillment of prophecy, a warning from God that had come to pass. The pain of slavery was not just about forced labor. It was about losing an identity. The names of the Israelites were erased, their traditions stolen, their history rewritten. And now, centuries later, they are trying to reclaim what was lost. But not everyone agrees with this narrative. Many Jewish scholars and historians reject the idea that the Black Biblical Israelites are connected to ancient Israel. They argue that Jewish history is well documented, and that while Jewish communities did exist in Africa, they were separate from those taken in the slave trade. Others believe that the claim of Black Israelites is a threat to mainstream religious institutions. If their history is correct, it challenges long-held beliefs about race, faith, and the identity of God's chosen people. For the Black Biblical Israelites, however, the evidence is clear. Their story has been hidden, rewritten, and ignored, but it has not been erased. And now, as more people begin to question history, the truth is beginning to emerge. The question remains: who are the real Israelites? Were the true descendants of Israel scattered across Africa, sold into slavery, and forgotten by history? Or is this simply another controversial claim without historical backing? As Netanyahu's statement sends shockwaves across the world, this debate is no longer just about religion. It's about identity, power, and the rewriting of history. One thing is certain: the deeper we dig, the more we uncover. And the more we uncover, the more we realize that history may not be what we were taught. What do you believe? Stay with us, because this story goes much deeper than you can imagine. For thousands of years, Israel has been more than just a place on the map. It is a symbol of faith, of heritage, of survival. It is the land promised to the descendants of Abraham, the place where history and prophecy collide. But in a land so deeply rooted in religious identity, one question remains controversial: who belongs here? From the very beginning, Israel has stood as a beacon for Jewish people worldwide. After the horrors of the Holocaust, the formation of Israel in 1948 was not just about reclaiming land, it was about reclaiming a lost identity. The world recognized Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. But what happens when people, long forgotten by history, step forward and say, "We are Israelites too"? This is where the battle begins. In 1950, just 2 years after Israel's independence, the law of return was introduced. It was a powerful statement. Anyone with Jewish ancestry had the right to return to Israel and claim citizenship. It was meant to reunite a scattered people, to bring home those who had suffered exile and persecution for centuries. For many, the answer seems clear. Israel follows halakha, Jewish religious law, which defines a Jew as someone born to a Jewish mother, or someone who has converted to Judaism under Orthodox standards. But what about those who believe their ancestors were Israelites, stolen from their homeland and stripped of their identity? For the Black Biblical Israelites, this is the core of the struggle. They claim their Jewish heritage was erased through centuries of slavery and forced assimilation. Yet, when they seek recognition in Israel, they are often met with resistance. They don't fit into the traditional definition of Jewishness, and so they are denied the right of return. Imagine discovering that your ancestors were exiled from their homeland, only to be told centuries later that you are a foreigner. The pain of exile never ends. Under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel has taken a stronger stance on Jewish identity. His government has prioritized Jewish immigration, strengthening the nation's identity and ensuring Israel remains a Jewish state. But his policies have also raised serious questions about who is welcome and who is not. When Netanyahu made his shocking statement, the world listened. Some saw it as a bold reaffirmation of Jewish identity. Others saw it as a dismissal of those who have been fighting for recognition. But one thing was clear: Israel's position on identity is more political than ever. For the Black Biblical Israelites, this was more than just a political statement. It was another door slammed in their faces. For decades, many of them have tried to gain recognition from Israel, some even making the journey there, only to be denied citizenship or forced to undergo strict conversions. Some communities, like the Hebrew Israelites of Dimona, were allowed to stay in Israel but were never fully accepted as Jewish. Their struggle is not just about faith, it's about survival. Israel has always been a land of division, between religions, between ideologies, and now between identities. The Black Biblical Israelites are not the only ones facing this challenge. Ethiopian Jews, who have long been recognized as descendants of ancient Israelites, still face discrimination in Israel. Even Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, who come from Middle Eastern and African backgrounds, have struggled for equal treatment compared to European Ashkenazi Jews. If the law of return is about bringing back the scattered children of Israel, then should history be reconsidered? Should the lost tribes be recognized? Or is Israel only for those who fit into the official narrative? This is not just a religious debate. It is a battle over history, over power, over the very meaning of being an Israelite. For the Black Biblical Israelites, the fight is far from over. Every year, more people step forward with evidence, with history, with faith, demanding recognition. But will Israel ever open its doors to them? Or will their voices continue to be silenced? One thing is certain. Netanyahu's statement has forced the world to ask questions that cannot be ignored anymore. Because history is not just about the past. It is about the choices we make today. And for those fighting for their lost identity, the battle for truth is just beginning. A moment that stopped. The world history is full of speeches that change the course of the world. Some words ignite revolutions, others heal wounds, and some divide nations. But when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took the podium and uttered his bold statement, the world did not just listen, it froze. The air in the room was heavy. Every camera was fixed on him, every journalist leaning in, waiting to catch his every word. And then he said something that no one expected. A single statement that challenged beliefs, reshaped narratives, and questioned the very identity of Israel and the Jewish people. People gasped. Some nodded in silent agreement, while others sat in stunned disbelief. What did he say? Why did it cause such an uproar? And what does it mean for the Black Biblical Israelites? To understand the weight of his words, we must first understand the battlefield of identity in Israel, a battle that has raged for centuries. What did Netanyahu say? The words that sparked controversy. Netanyahu's statement was short, powerful, and deeply controversial. His words carried the weight of history, religion, and politics all at once. Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, those who have carried this identity through history. We determine who is part of this nation, and we will not allow history to be rewritten. At first glance, these words might not seem like much. A simple reaffirmation of Israel's status as a Jewish state. But for millions of Black Biblical Israelites, it was more than just a political statement. It was a denial of their history, their faith, and their identity. For decades, Black Israelites have claimed that they are the true descendants of the ancient Israelites, the lost tribes who were scattered across the world, many of whom ended up in Africa before being taken as slaves. Their belief is deeply rooted in biblical prophecy, historical evidence, and lived experiences. And yet, here was the leader of Israel, standing on a global stage, dismissing their claim in a single breath. Was this a political move, a religious stance, or something more? The immediate reaction: supporters versus critics. As Netanyahu's words echoed across the world, reactions came fast. Some in praise, others in outrage. Supporters of Netanyahu saw this as a necessary statement, a way to preserve the integrity of Jewish identity in Israel. Many Orthodox Jewish leaders applauded him for taking a strong stance against what they see as historical revisionism. To them, Judaism has strict rules for who is considered Jewish, and those rules should not change. Israeli politicians, particularly those aligned with right-wing and nationalist movements, backed Netanyahu's words. They argued that Israel must protect itself from identity dilution, ensuring that only those who fit the traditional Jewish definition can claim the land as their home. But the Black Biblical Israelites and their supporters saw this as an outright rejection of their truth. It was more than just words. It was a door slammed shut in their faces. For them, Netanyahu's statement was proof of what they had always believed, that their history had been stolen, that their rightful identity had been erased, that even when they present evidence, faith, and conviction, They are still told they do not belong. Protests erupted in different parts of the world. In the United States, Black Israelite communities gathered in large numbers, marching and demanding recognition. In Africa, historians and religious leaders spoke out, emphasizing that Israel cannot ignore the deep connections between biblical history and African ancestry. Even within Israel, voices rose in disagreement. Some Israeli scholars and human rights activists warned that Netanyahu's statement could deepen racial and religious tensions. Others feared that it would further alienate Ethiopian Jews and other African Jewish communities who already face discrimination within Israel. A statement, fueled by politics or religion, the big question remains: was Netanyahu's statement a political move, a religious stance, or both? On one hand, Israel has always been in a delicate political position. It must balance its Jewish identity while maintaining international relations. Netanyahu has been known for his strong nationalist policies, and this statement might have been aimed at reinforcing that narrative. But on the other hand, religion and politics in Israel are inseparable. The question of who is a Jew and who has the right to the land is as much a theological debate as it is a legal one. By making this statement, Netanyahu wasn't just speaking as a political leader. He was reinforcing a religious doctrine that many Black Biblical Israelites reject. Words have power. They can unite or divide, heal or wound, inspire or ignite flames of rage. When Benjamin Netanyahu made his bold statement about Israel's identity, it wasn't just a speech. It was an earthquake. The tremors were felt across continents, shaking the foundations of religious beliefs, historical narratives, and political alliances. In that moment, it was no longer just about Israel. It became about who controls history, who has the right to call themselves chosen, and who has been left out of the story. The world erupted. From religious scholars to world leaders, from street protests to televised debates, one thing was clear: this conversation could no longer be ignored. Jewish scholars and historians, defending tradition or avoiding the truth. Among the first to respond were Jewish scholars, historians, and religious leaders. Their stance: fierce defense of tradition. Prominent rabbis and historians quickly reaffirmed Netanyahu's words. They argued that Judaism has always had a clear and strict definition of identity, one that is deeply rooted in halakha, Jewish religious law. According to them, Jewish lineage has been passed down through mothers for centuries, and anyone claiming Israelite heritage outside of this rule must undergo conversion. For these scholars, the Black Biblical Israelites' claim wasn't just incorrect. It was a dangerous rewriting of history. The Jewish people have survived for thousands of years by maintaining strict traditions. We cannot simply change history because of new claims, said one prominent Israeli historian. There is no genetic or historical evidence that African Americans or other black groups have any connection to the biblical Israelites, stated a chief rabbi in Jerusalem. But here's the issue. History is not always written by those who lived it. It is written by those with power. And that's exactly what the Black Biblical Israelites argue. If history is truly examined, can we ignore the ancient Jewish communities of Africa? Can we dismiss the fact that Israelite tribes were scattered across different lands? Could there be more to the story than what has been accepted for centuries? Not all Jewish historians were dismissive. Some Israeli anthropologists and researchers admitted that the history of the Jewish diaspora is complex and still full of unknowns. We know that Jewish communities existed in Africa for centuries. What we don't know is whether some of them were part of the original lost tribes, said one Tel Aviv University historian. The history of exile is complicated. If we look deeper, we may find truths that challenge what we think we know, another researcher noted. But for many in power, challenging accepted history is not an option. For the Black Biblical Israelites, Netanyahu's words were not just offensive. They were proof of what they had been saying for years. The world does not want to acknowledge their truth. The response from the Black Israelite community was immediate and unapologetic. We are the people of the book. "You can try to silence us, but history speaks louder than politics," said a leader from a major Black Israelite congregation. "You denied our identity during slavery. You denied it when we built your cities. And now you deny it again. The truth will rise," another speaker declared. Across the United States, Africa, and even parts of Israel, marches, speeches, and protests erupted. Social media was flooded with messages of resistance. Hashtags like "Narch We're Israel" and "Our Truth Will Rise" trended worldwide. For decades, Black Israelites have faced mockery, rejection, and even persecution for claiming their heritage. They have been labeled extremists, conspiracy theorists, and cult members. But now, with Netanyahu's words, their movement had a new sense of urgency. Because if their claim is false, why does the world work so hard to silence them? While Israel dealt with the internal firestorm, the United States and African nations were watching closely. And their reactions couldn't have been more different. Some Christian and Jewish organizations supported Netanyahu, arguing that only those recognized by traditional Jewish law should be considered Jewish. Others, especially in Black religious and activist circles, saw this as yet another attempt to erase Black history and identity. Politicians were forced to take sides. Some, particularly those aligned with Israel, stayed silent or supported Netanyahu's stance. But progressive leaders and civil rights activists voiced strong opposition, questioning why Israel has historically struggled with accepting Black Jews, especially Ethiopian Jews. America has long denied Black people their history. It's no surprise that Israel would do the same, one activist said. This isn't just about Israel. It's about a global system that decides who gets to claim identity and who doesn't, a U.S. senator tweeted. Meanwhile, in Africa, the response was different, calm yet deeply reflective.